earlier this week, China's ambassador to Australia said relations between the two countries are at a new juncture. This with the election of a new Australian government and the first minister-to-minister talks in more than 2 years. Ambassador Xiao Qian gave an upbeat assessment of their relationship potential in a speech on Saturday. And on Sunday, China's defense minister held an hour-long meeting with his Australian counterpart on the sidelines of a regional security summit in Singapore. Now, despite these steps, observers are wary of describing the meeting as a thawing of a diplomatic deep freeze between the two countries. Well, joining us now to discuss the significance of this is Ms. Cleo Paskal, Indo-Pacific expert and non-resident fellow at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. Ma'am, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, China and Australia recently engaged in Pacific island hopping tours in the region. So what are both sides looking to gain here?
So in the case of China, it was a big trip by Wang Yi, who's their foreign minister, and he went physically to 8 Pacific Island countries. So the map you had up before with the red band, those were the exclusive economic zones in the countries that he visited. And if you look at that map, you can see that, if they maintain or get stronger relations with those countries, they've created a band that makes it possible to interdict Australia and New Zealand in the case of conflict. If they have their fishing fleets, their maritime militia, and some naval installations in those locations, even if it's just under the guise of humanitarian assistance and disaster response, they can make it very difficult for the Australians. And the Australians are, for their part, trying to, I think, regain some of what they think should be their rightful place in the region. Whether the Pacific Islanders feel that they have a rightful place there or not is what's being decided currently.
And to that point, you mentioned in an article on in the Sunday Guardian that China is engaged in entropic warfare in the region. So can you tell us a little bit more about this entropic warfare?
Right. So the word entropy, or in this context, entropic warfare, means fragmentation, disintegration, the creation of a state of chaos. And what China seems to try to do in target countries is dissolve, destroy, weaken the social and economic and political fabrics of the country so that it's easier for their influence operations to be effective. So that might be through social media operations, through taking over key sectors, through disrupting supply chains. This might all sound very familiar to people in North America because we've also been the target of some of these entropic warfare operations. And in the case of the Pacific Islands, they took a country like the Solomon Islands, which was relatively stable 2 years ago when it was in recognition of Taiwan. It flipped to China. And within those 2 years, they created a state of such internal chaos that there were riots there. And that justified the authoritarian government bringing in PLA police trainers. So it can happen very quickly, creating a state of chaos that justifies an authoritarian government to become even closer to Beijing and bring in military, if not police, to help put down political dissent.
And what do we know so far about the moves made by Australia's newly elected government?
So we're all watching quite closely. The language is kind of interesting. They say they want to step up and they're blaming a lot on previous administrations. But China's toehold in the region was a bipartisan success. It took 2 decades of every political party in Australia not handling this well for China to get such a strong toehold. So the situation won't be remedied if that's the desire coming out of Canberra quickly. And hopefully what they say they want to happen, which is to create a situation that's more prosperous and stable and secure for the people of the Pacific, actually does happen. But it needs to be watched very closely. And
for our viewers here in Canada, what's at stake in this dispute?
So this is the front line between Asia and the Americas. These islands, Solomon Islands, is the location of the Battle of Guadalcanal. It'll be the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Guadalcanal this summer. These are highly strategic locations. If it comes to conflict over Taiwan, for example, we know that China is looking to secure its position in the Pacific Islands to be able to have a buffer so that allies can't get to Taiwan in order to be able to help the people of Taiwan remain democratic and free. So it's a very strategically important location that affects the balance of power across the Indo-Pacific and the success and ability of democracies to sustain themselves.
All right, Ms. Cleo Paskal from FDD, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, we've got more news from around the world, of course. The European Central Bank vows to create a new unspecified market backstop. Russia once again cuts natural gas exports through a key European pipeline. Egypt, Israel, and the EU have signed a deal involving liquefied natural gas sales, and automakers reported nearly 400 crashes with semi-automated vehicles. We'll have these stories and more news from around the world coming up next. Stay with us.